I never thought a simple doctor's appointment would turn into the moment I realized just how invisible I had become to my own family. The soft chime of my phone echoed through the quiet morning as I sat on the worn floral armchair, a cup of lukewarm tea forgotten on the coaster beside me. Sunlight streamed through the bay window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, glittering secret. I was reading a book I'd owned for 30 years but never opened, its pages crisp and smelling of vanilla and thyme. It was the first time in what felt like a lifetime I'd had a moment to myself, a real, untethered moment where I could breathe without the weight of someone else's needs pressing down on my chest. My house was silent, a rare and precious commodity. Usually, it was filled with the cacophony of life, the shrill glee of my grandchildren, the urgent, overlapping conversations of my children planning their lives around my availability, the constant hum of the washer and dryer tumbling clothes that weren't my own. But today, there was only the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a steady, rhythmic heartbeat for a house that was finally at rest. I had been a mother for 45 years and a grandmother for 12. My life had been a tapestry woven with the threads of others' lives. I was the emergency contact, the last-minute babysitter, the keeper of secrets, the shoulder to cry on, the unpaid chef, and the silent, ever-present support system. My own needs had long been relegated to the bottom of a never-ending to-do list, so far down that I'd forgotten they even existed. My husband, Robert, had been gone for a decade, and in the raw, gaping space his absence left, my children and their families had rushed in, filling every void with their own demands until there was no space left for me, Eleanor. I had become simply mom or grandma, a title, a function, a utility. I told myself it was love. I told myself this was what a good mother did. I had convinced myself that my purpose was found in my usefulness to them. As I reached for my phone, intending only to check the weather, I saw the message from my daughter, Lucy. It was a picture of my youngest grandchild, 3-year-old Chloe, her face smeared with chocolate, a triumphant grin on her face. My heart did its familiar little flip. She was a darling. But then came the text beneath it, "Isn't she the cutest? Hey, are you free this weekend? Mark and I have his work gala, it's a really big deal for his promotion. We'd need you from Friday evening through Sunday brunch." There was no question mark. It was a statement of expectation. I reread the message, a familiar knot tightening in my stomach. This weekend. I had been looking forward to this weekend. It was supposed to be mine. I had a doctor's appointment on Saturday morning. It was just a routine physical, but it felt monumental to me. I hadn't seen my own doctor in over 2 years, always canceling for a sick grandchild or a last-minute trip my son, David, needed me to house sit for. This time, I had promised myself I would go. My hip had been aching with a persistent, dull throb, and my blood pressure felt high whenever I got flustered, which was often. It was something for me, a small act of self-preservation. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. The old, ingrained habit of immediate compliance warred with a tiny, burgeoning sprout of self-worth. I could feel the guilt already starting to creep in, a toxic, cloying vine. They need you. It's for Mark's career. What's more important? My own inner voice was a chorus of self-recrimination, but the ache in my hip gave a sharp, timely twinge, a physical reminder of my own neglected vessel. With a deep breath that felt more like a rebellion than a simple intake of air, I typed back, "She's adorable, sweetheart. I can't this weekend, though. I have a doctor's appointment on Saturday morning that I really can't miss." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. A wave of nervous energy washed over me. It felt like I had just cut a wire on a bomb. I stared at the screen, watching the 3 little dots appear and disappear as Lucy typed her reply. I braced myself for disappointment, perhaps a bit of whining, but what I hoped for was a simple, "Oh, okay, Mom. Hope everything is alright. We'll figure something else out." A flicker of understanding. "That's all I wanted." The reply came a moment later, and it landed with the force of a physical blow. "We really need you this weekend, Mom. It's not just a party, it's a major networking event. Can't you just move your appointment? We don't have anyone else. There it was. No concern for my health, no curiosity about the appointment, no acknowledgement of my own life outside of her needs. Just the cold, hard calculus of her convenience. Can't you just move it? The words were so casual, so dismissive. As if my health, my time, my life was a pawn on her chessboard, to be moved aside at her whim. I wasn't a person with needs, I was a resource, a backup plan that had inconveniently developed a will of its own. In that singular, heart-stopping moment, the carefully constructed illusion of my happy, sacrificial life shattered into a million pieces. The dust motes dancing in the sun suddenly looked like the ashes of my own identity. I looked around my quiet living room, at the armchair molded to my shape, at the silent clock, at the forgotten book, and I realized with a clarity that was both terrifying and liberating that I was utterly, completely invisible. I was a ghost in my own life, a silent servant whose only value was in her unwavering, unquestioning availability. The refusal to see me, to even consider my needs as valid, was a deeper cut than any angry word could ever be. The silence that followed her text was no longer peaceful. It was cavernous. It was the sound of my own worthlessness echoing back at me. And in that hollow, deafening silence, a single, unfamiliar thought began to take root. No. That night, sleep was a distant country I couldn't find the passport for. I lay in my bed, the familiar floral quilt pulled up to my chin, and stared at the ceiling where shadows from the streetlights outside danced a slow, mournful waltz. The conversation with Lucy replayed in my mind on an endless, torturous loop. Can't you just move it? The words had seemed so small on the screen, but in the darkness of my room, they had grown into monstrous pronouncements of my own insignificance. Each repetition was another grain of salt ground into the wound. I tried to be rational. I tried to see it from her perspective. Lucy was a young mother, juggling a career, a marriage, a toddler. She was stressed, overwhelmed. I remembered those days, the feeling of being pulled in a dozen different directions at once, the constant, low-grade panic that you were failing at everything. I had been there. I had survived it. And a huge part of how I'd survived was because of my own mother, God rest her soul. She had been my rock, always there, never complaining. She would have moved the appointment. She would have moved a mountain if I had asked her to. The thought brought with it a fresh wave of guilt. Was I failing Lucy by not being the mother my own had been to me? Was I being selfish? But then another, darker thought slithered in. My mother had died at 68 from a sudden, massive heart attack. She had never been to a doctor for herself, not once that I could remember. She was always too busy taking care of my father, of me, of my brother. She had high blood pressure, we found out later. Untreated. Ignored. She had complained of fatigue for months, but we had all dismissed it as the normal tiredness of a woman her age. We hadn't seen her. We had seen her function, her role, but not the woman herself, slowly fading before our eyes. The parallel was so stark, so chilling, it made me gasp for air. Was I doomed to repeat her history? To sacrifice myself on the altar of family until there was nothing left to burn? I turned over, punching my pillow into a new shape, as if I could physically beat the turmoil out of my head. I thought back over the years since Robert died. At first, the kids had been wonderful. They'd rallied around me, bringing casseroles, checking in daily, making sure I wasn't too lonely. But slowly, subtly, the dynamic had shifted. The check-ins became requests. The visits became drop-offs. My home, once my sanctuary with Robert, had become a neutral ground, a convenient way station. Mom, can you watch the kids? I have a last-minute meeting. Mom, we're having the kitchen redone, can we store all our stuff in your garage for a few weeks? Mom, can you co-sign on this loan? It's just a formality, we'll never miss a payment. I had said yes. I had always said yes. Each yes was a small erosion of my own boundaries, a tiny concession of my own life. I had co-signed the loan for my son, David, and his wife, Sarah, for their new car. They had missed 3 payments in the last year, and the polite but firm letters from the bank came to my address. I had paid them myself, dipping into the savings Robert and I had so carefully built, telling myself it was a one-time thing. My garage was still cluttered with Lucy and Mark's kitchen supplies from a renovation that had finished 6 months ago. My freezer was perpetually stocked with chicken nuggets and fish sticks for the grandchildren, leaving little room for the healthy, single-portion meals I should have been making for myself. I had become the family's shock absorber, the universal safety net. And the problem with being a safety net is that people forget you're there until they're falling. They take for granted the strength of your weave, the security you provide. They don't stop to think about the constant tension you're under, the fraying of your threads. When had I stopped mattering as Eleanor? Was it the day I retired from my part-time job as a librarian to be more available for the first grandchild? Was it the day I sold the little convertible Robert and I had loved, because it wasn't practical for car seats? Or had it been a much slower, more insidious process, a gradual fading into the background of everyone else's Technicolor life? I thought of the pottery class I'd seen advertised at the community center. I'd always wanted to work with clay, to feel the cool, wet earth spinning between my hands, to create something beautiful and useless, something just for the joy of it. I'd even picked up a flyer. It was still tucked inside my book. The class was on Tuesday evenings, but Tuesday evenings were when David usually dropped off his golden retriever, Cooper, because he had a late-night work call and Sarah had her yoga class. I was the designated dog sitter. Of course, a hot, unfamiliar anger began to simmer beneath the surface of my sadness and guilt. It wasn't the explosive, fleeting anger of an argument. It was a slow, deep burn, the kind that forges steel. It was the anger of a lifetime of self-denial. The anger of being taken for granted. The anger of realizing that the love I was being given was conditional, predicated on my utility. I threw back the covers and walked to the window, the old wooden floorboards cold beneath my feet. I looked out at the quiet suburban street, the houses dark and sleeping. In one of those houses, my daughter was sleeping soundly, confident that her mother would, as always, fold. That her needs would, as always, come first. But something had fractured. The foundation of my lifelong philosophy, to give, to serve, to put others first, had cracked wide open. The silent struggle was no longer silent. It was a roar in my ears. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window pane, my own reflection a ghostly, transparent figure looking back at me. For the first time, I wasn't seeing a mother or a grandmother. I was seeing a woman. A woman who had a doctor's appointment on Saturday. A woman who deserved to be seen. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind you take when you're about to dive into icy water. And in the silent darkness, I whispered the words that would become my mantra, my declaration of independence. I can't keep living like this. It wasn't a cry of despair. It was a promise. A promise to the tired, invisible woman in the reflection. And as I finally climbed back into bed, the turmoil began to settle, replaced by a strange and terrifying calm. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I had the strength to follow through. But I knew one thing for certain, I was not moving my appointment. The battle had just begun. The week crawled by in a state of suspended animation. I didn't hear from Lucy, and I didn't reach out. The silence from her end was a tactical weapon, I knew. It was designed to make me feel guilty, to make me anxious, to make me break first and text her with an apology and an offer to cancel my plans. In the past, it would have worked. By Wednesday, I would have been a wreck, convincing myself I was a terrible mother, and by Thursday, I would have caved. But this time was different. The slow-burning anger had solidified into a quiet resolve. The silence wasn't a punishment, it was a respite. It was space for me to think. On Friday afternoon, the inevitable call came. I saw Lucy's picture flash on the screen and my heart hammered against my ribs. I let it ring 3 times before answering, taking a deep breath to steady my voice. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was tight, clipped. None of the usual warmth, "Hello, sweetheart." I kept my own tone level, calm. "So, I haven't heard from you. I assume you've had a change of heart about this weekend?" The condescension dripped from her words. A change of heart, as if my own needs were a whimsical fancy I needed to get over. "No, Lucy, I haven't. As I said, I have an appointment tomorrow morning." There was a huff of exasperated air on the other end. "Mom, I already told you, this is a huge deal for Mark. His boss is going to be there. We can't just skip it. And we literally have no one else to watch Chloe. The sitters are all booked. You're our only option. You're our only option." The words were meant to make me feel indispensable, but instead, they made me feel trapped. I was not a choice, I was a last resort. "I'm sorry to hear that, Lucy. It sounds like you're in a tough spot. I was using a technique I'd read about in one of the library's self-help books: validate the feeling, but don't accept the responsibility." Her voice rose in pitch, sharpened with disbelief. "A tough spot? Mom, this is your grandchild. Are you seriously choosing a routine checkup over helping your family?" The guilt-laden plea. The final arrow in her quiver. And it hit its mark. A part of me screamed to just give in, to make the peace, to be the good mother again. But the image of my own mother, gone too soon, flashed in my mind. The ache in my hip gave another throb. "It's not a choice between the two, Lucy. It's a matter of my own health, which I have neglected for too long. I am your mother, and Chloe's grandmother, and I love you both dearly. But I am also a person, and I need to take care of myself." The words came out steadier than I felt. A cold, hard silence stretched between us. Then, with a voice that could have cut glass, she said, "Fine. Be selfish. I guess we'll just have to tell Mark's boss that we can't come because my mother decided her little doctor's visit was more important than her family's future. I hope you're happy." And she hung up. The click of the disconnected line was a gunshot in the quiet room. My hand was trembling as I lowered the phone. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and stinging. It hurt. It hurt more than I could have ever imagined. To be called selfish by my own child, the person I had dedicated my life to. But underneath the profound hurt, that stubborn, newly born resolve held firm. This was the breaking point. This was the final, crushing weight that made the whole structure collapse. The next day, Saturday, I woke up feeling hollowed out. The joy I should have felt about finally going to my appointment was gone, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. I almost cancelled. I picked up the phone twice to call the doctor's office. But I forced myself to get dressed, to eat a piece of toast I could barely swallow, and to get in my car. The entire drive there, I felt like a criminal on my way to a sentencing. As I walked into Lucy and Mark's house later that day, because of course, I had caved, not on the appointment, but on helping them after it, the guilt was a physical cloak. Lucy had called me in tears an hour after my appointment, saying Mark had gone to the gala alone, that she was home with Chloe, and that this had ruined everything. Her voice was thick with accusation and misery, and my resolve, so strong on the phone, had crumbled in the face of her raw distress. So I had agreed to come over and watch Chloe so a distraught Lucy could at least get a few hours of sleep. I let myself in with my key. The house was a disaster zone. Toys were strewn across the floor like the aftermath of a tiny, plastic hurricane. Dishes were piled in the sink, and the air was thick with the smell of stale air and baby powder. The chaos was overwhelming, a visual representation of the turmoil I felt inside. Lucy was slumped on the sofa, still in her pajamas, her face pale and tear-streaked. She barely looked at me when I came in, just gestured vaguely towards the baby monitor. "She's sleeping. I'm going to bed. Don't wake me up unless the house is on fire." She didn't say thank you. She didn't acknowledge the compromise I had made. She just retreated into her own bubble of resentment, leaving me to clean up the emotional and physical debris. I stood in the middle of their living room, the silence of the sleeping house pressing in on me. I felt it then, more acutely than ever before, the profound loneliness of being in the midst of my own family. I was here, physically present, but I was not seen. I was a functionary, a cog in their machine, brought in to perform a task. The sense of being used was a bitter pill in my throat. Later that evening, as I sat in the rocking chair in Chloe's darkened room, the gentle weight of my sleeping grandchild in my arms, I had a moment of terrible clarity. The rhythmic creak of the chair, the soft scent of the baby, the quiet hum of the nightlight, it should have been a moment of grandmotherly bliss. But instead, it was a moment of reckoning. I looked down at Chloe's peaceful, innocent face, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. I would do anything for this child. My love for her was a fierce, primal force. But what kind of example was I setting for her? That a woman's worth is measured in her ability to erase herself for others? That her needs should always come last? I realized how much of myself I had given up over the years, not just for my children, but for my husband, for my parents, for everyone. I had trimmed and pruned my own branches so that everyone else could have more sunlight, and now I was left a stunted, twisted version of the person I could have been. The well of my generosity had run dry. There was nothing left to give. I had been pouring from an empty cup for years, and now it was starting to crack. That was it. The final straw. It wasn't Lucy's anger or her accusations. It was this quiet, devastating realization in the dark. The realization that by constantly sacrificing myself, I wasn't just harming myself, I was perpetuating a cycle of female self-abnegation that I would not, could not, pass down to another generation. I rocked my granddaughter, but for the first time, I felt the urge to stand up. Not just for myself, but for her. A new kind of strength, one born not of anger but of a fierce, protective love, began to fill the hollow spaces inside me. The tears that slid down my cheeks were no longer tears of hurt, but of resolve. The rocking chair creaked on, a slow, steady rhythm marking the end of one life and the beginning of another. I would not break. I would rebuild. The next morning, I was up before anyone else. I moved through the quiet house like a woman on a mission, a strange sense of calm purpose settled over me. I made a pot of coffee, the rich aroma cutting through the stale air of the house. I tidied the living room, not out of obligation, but because I needed a sense of order in the external world to match the new order I was trying to create within myself. I wasn't the resentful maid anymore, I was preparing my battlefield. When Lucy finally emerged from her room around 10, her eyes were puffy and she was wrapped in a thick robe, a shield against the world. She avoided my gaze, heading straight for the coffee pot and pouring herself a large mug. "Morning," she mumbled into the ceramic. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said, my voice even. "We need to talk." She sighed, a long, weary sound. "Mom, I'm really not in the mood for a lecture." "It's not a lecture, Lucy. It's a conversation. One we should have had a long time ago." I gestured to the kitchen table, which I had cleared. "Please. Sit down." To my surprise, she did, slumping into a chair with the air of someone surrendering. I sat opposite her, placing my own mug on the table and folding my hands on top of it to still their slight tremor. I looked directly at her, not with anger, but with a quiet intensity. "Lucy," I began, my voice trembling just a little but gaining strength with each word. "I love you more than words can say. And I love being a mother and a grandmother. But the way things are between us, it's not working for me anymore." She looked up, a flicker of something, guilt, confusion, in her eyes. "What are you talking about? I thought we were fine, until you decided to." She trailed off, not wanting to rehash the fight. "Until I decided to prioritize my own health for one morning?" I finished for her, keeping my tone gentle. "That's what I'm talking about. For years, I have made myself endlessly available to you and to David. I've rearranged my life, cancelled my plans, and put my own needs aside to be there for you. And I did it out of love. But somewhere along the line, it stopped being a gift I was offering and started being something you expected. Something you felt entitled to." She winced, a clear sign that the words were hitting home. "I don't feel entitled." She started to protest, but her voice lacked conviction. "Don't you?" I pressed on, not unkindly. "When I told you I had a doctor's appointment, your first and only reaction was to ask me to move it for your convenience. You didn't ask if I was okay. You didn't ask why I was going. You saw my life as an obstacle to yours. And yesterday, when you called me, you punished me for it. You called me selfish." Tears welled in her eyes. "I was upset, Mom." Mark was so disappointed. "I understand you were upset," I acknowledged. "But your words have power, Lucy. And they made me feel like my only value to you is what I can do for you. Like I'm not a person, just a service." I took a deep breath. This was the hard part. I am not your permanent, on-call babysitter. I am not your financial safety net. I am not the keeper of your spare belongings. I am your mother. And I need to have my own life. A life that doesn't completely revolve around waiting for you to need me. She was crying now, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. "You never said anything before," she whispered, and it was the classic defense of the oblivious. "You're right," I said, and my voice softened with a sadness for us both. "I never did. That's my fault. I taught you that my needs didn't matter. I taught you that you could take me for granted because I never showed you my boundaries. I am just as responsible for this situation as you are. But that ends today. I'm changing the lesson." I leaned forward, my hands still folded. "From now on, I will help when I can, and when I want to. But I will also say no. I will have my own plans, my own friends, my own life. I will not be available at a moment's notice. You and Mark, and David and Sarah, you are all capable adults. You need to build your own support systems, your own backup plans that don't begin and end with me." I let the words hang in the air between us. It was a declaration of independence, a redrawing of our entire relationship map. She looked at me, truly looked at me, and for the first time, I think she saw past Mom and saw Eleanor. She saw a woman with her own hurts, her own needs, her own quiet strength. I didn't realize," she stammered, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her robe. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I've been so wrapped up in my own world, I just assumed. I'm sorry." It wasn't a magic fix. It wasn't a Hollywood ending where we hugged and everything was instantly perfect. But it was a start. It was a crack of light in a door that had been sealed shut for years. The apology was real, born of a genuine, dawning understanding. "I know, sweetheart," I said, and I finally reached across the table and took her hand. It felt small and fragile in mine. "And I'm sorry too. For letting it get this far." Later that day, I went home to my own quiet house. But this time, the silence didn't feel like neglect. It felt like possibility. It felt like my own. My moment of defiance hadn't been a fiery explosion, but a quiet, firm conversation at a kitchen table. And it had changed everything. The old map was gone. Now, I had to draw a new one, for a journey I would be taking, for the first time, on my own terms. The weeks that followed were a delicate, awkward dance. The conversation with Lucy had been a seismic event, and the aftershocks continued to ripple through the family. I had to have a similar, though less tearful, conversation with my son, David. He was more practical, less emotional than Lucy, but the core of his reaction was the same, a sort of baffled surprise. "But Mom, you've always been there," he said over the phone, the confusion evident in his voice. "When Sarah and I were looking for a house, you said you wanted to be close by so you could help with the kids." "And I did," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "And I love helping. But helping is different from being the default solution to every single scheduling conflict you have. David, last month I had little James for 60 hours. That's more than a full-time job. I'm 70 years old. I'm tired." The silence on his end told me he was actually processing the number. 60 hours. He'd probably never thought to quantify it. To him, it was just Mom watching James. To me, it was 60 hours of my life, of my energy, of my time. "Wow," he said finally. I didn't think of it like that. I guess we just got used to it." "I know. We all did," I said. "And now we all have to get unused to it." The first real test came a week later. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was getting ready to leave for my second pottery class. My first one had been a revelation. The feel of the cold, damp clay under my fingers, the intense focus required to center it on the spinning wheel, the friendly, low-key chatter of the other students. It was a world away from toddlers and dog-sitting. It was a world that was entirely mine. My phone rang, and it was David. "Hey Mom, quick question. Can you grab Cooper for a few hours? Sarah's yoga class is running late and I have to jump on a conference call with the London office in 10 minutes." The old Eleanor would have said, "Of course, dear, I'm on my way." My heart did a little lurch of anxiety, the familiar pull of obligation. But I took a breath, pictured the lopsided little bowl I had made last week, and said, "I'm sorry, David, I can't tonight. I'm just walking out the door for my pottery class." "Your what?" "My pottery class. It's on Tuesday nights." There was a pause. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, trying to reconfigure a world in which his mother was not sitting by the phone on a Tuesday night waiting to be needed. "Oh. Right. You mentioned that," he said, though I knew I hadn't mentioned it to him. "Okay. Well, I guess I'll have to gate him in the kitchen. He's not going to like that." "Okay, well, have fun." He hung up, and I stood in my hallway, a giddy sense of freedom washing over me. It was such a small thing, a simple no. But it felt like a monumental victory. I had chosen my joy over his convenience. I had chosen the messy, creative potential of a lump of clay over being a placeholder for his dog. It was exhilarating. The shift was gradual, a slow turning of a massive ship. There were moments of resistance, frustrated sighs from the kids when they had to scramble to find a real babysitter and pay them real money. There was an awkward conversation when I called David and told him I needed him to start making payments on the car loan he had defaulted on, as the bank was now sending me letters with red ink. "Mom, things are a little tight right now," he'd hedged. "I understand that, David," I'd said, my voice firm. "But my savings account, the one Robert and I built for my retirement, is not a slush fund for your expenses. You are a grown man with a good job. You need to handle your responsibilities. I co-signed that loan to help you, not to take it on for you." That conversation ended with him agreeing, grudgingly, to set up an automatic payment plan. It was another difficult, boundary-setting moment that left me feeling drained but also strangely empowered. I was taking back control, not just of my time, but of my financial security. Meanwhile, I was slowly, tentatively, building a life outside of my family. The pottery class was my anchor. I started going for walks in the morning, not rushing to be ready for a grandchild drop-off, but just for the pleasure of it, noticing the way the light filtered through the leaves, the scent of jasmine from a neighbor's fence. I reconnected with an old friend from my library days, a sharp-witted widow named Carol, and we started having lunch once a week. One afternoon, over salads, I confessed to her what had been going on with my family. She'd nodded knowingly, sipping her iced tea. "Eleanor, honey, we raise them to be independent, but we forget to become independent from them," she said wisely. "It's the great trap of modern grandmotherhood. We're expected to have the freedom of a retiree and the availability of a stay-at-home mom." Her words were a bomb. I wasn't alone. This wasn't some unique failing of my family, it was a common pattern, a societal expectation I had fallen into. The biggest shift, however, was internal. With each small step I took for myself, I felt a piece of my old identity returning. The quiet, thoughtful woman who loved books. The woman who had a secret, silly sense of humor. The woman who had opinions on politics and art. She had been buried for so long under layers of mom and grandma, and I had almost forgotten she existed. But now, she was re-emerging, blinking in the sunlight. I started to feel less like a ghost in my own house and more like its rightful owner. The silence was no longer empty, it was filled with my own thoughts, my own plans, my own peace. It was the sound of me, coming home to myself. The pottery studio became my sanctuary. The scent of damp earth, the rhythmic whir of the wheels, the sight of shelves lined with the clumsy first attempts and burgeoning masterpieces of my classmates, it all conspired to soothe a part of my soul I hadn't realized was so agitated. At first, My hands were clumsy and uncooperative. The clay would wobble, collapse, or spin right off the wheel into a sad, splattered heap. I was a perfectionist by nature, a trait honed by decades of trying to be the perfect mother and wife, and the initial failures were frustrating. But our instructor, a gentle man named Ben with hands permanently stained with a fine gray dust, was endlessly patient. "Don't fight it, Eleanor," he'd say, his voice a low, calming rumble over the sound of the wheels. "Feel where it wants to go. You're not conquering the clay, you're dancing with it." His words stuck with me. "You're not conquering it, you're dancing with it." It felt like a metaphor for my entire life. I had spent so long trying to conquer my circumstances, to manage everyone's needs, to force everything into a neat, orderly shape. I had never considered just dancing with it. Allowing for imperfection, for messiness, for my own rhythm. Slowly, my hands learned the language of the clay. I learned to feel the subtle shifts, to apply pressure here, to ease up there. I made a series of lopsided, thick-walled bowls that my friend Carol affectionately called my drunken peasant ware. I didn't care. They were mine. I had made them with my own two hands, for no other reason than the joy of creation. One evening, I managed to pull up the walls of a cylinder, thin and even. It was the first piece I was genuinely proud of. As I carefully lifted it off the wheel, a thrill shot through me, a pure, unadulterated sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. I looked at the simple, elegant shape, my fingerprints still faintly visible on its surface, and I felt a profound sense of rediscovery. This was who I was. A creator. A person capable of making something from nothing. I started bringing other parts of my old self back to life. I went to the public library, my old haunt, and got a library card in my own name for the first time in years. I had let my old one expire, as I was always just picking up picture books for the grandkids. I wandered through the stacks, running my fingers along the spines of novels and biographies, history tomes and poetry collections. I felt like a starving woman at a banquet. I checked out a stack of books so high the librarian gave me a knowing smile. I began to tend to my garden with a new intentionality. Robert had always been the gardener, and after he died, I'd mostly just kept the lawn mowed and the weeds at bay. But now, I found myself poring over seed catalogs. I tore out the overgrown, straggly rose bushes that had always snagged my clothes and planted a small vegetable patch with tomatoes, zucchini, and herbs. I planted sunflowers along the back fence, just because their cheerful, determined faces made me happy. Digging in the dirt, feeling the sun on my back, watching tiny green shoots push their way toward the sky, it was grounding. It was real. I was nurturing life, but this time, it was on my own terms, and its purpose was simply to be. My weekly lunches with Carol became a lifeline. We talked about everything and nothing, our children's latest antics, the state of the world, the books we were reading, our aching joints. With her, I wasn't Mom or Grandma. I was Eleanor. She saw me, and she remembered the woman I had been before my life was consumed by caregiving. "Do you remember that time we tried to make crepes for the library bake sale?" she cackled one afternoon, causing heads to turn in the quiet cafe. "We ended up with a pile of burned, lacy things and had to buy a sheet cake from the grocery store at the last minute." I laughed until tears streamed down my face, a deep, belly laugh that felt rusty from disuse. I had forgotten that story. I had forgotten that version of myself, the one who could fail at something and find it hilarious. The changes were not just external. My inner landscape was shifting. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety that had been my companion for years began to fade. I stopped checking my phone compulsively, waiting for the next summons. I started sleeping through the night, a deep, restorative sleep that had been impossible when I was subconsciously on call. One day, I was cleaning out the garage, finally tackling the boxes of kitchen supplies Lucy had left nearly a year ago. The old me would have seethed with resentment while carefully packing them up to return. The new me simply took a photo of the pile of boxes, sent it to Lucy, and texted, "Hi honey, I'm clearing out the garage. Do you want to come get these this weekend, or should I just put them on the curb for donation?" It was direct, unemotional, and it placed the responsibility squarely where it belonged. 30 minutes later, Lucy texted back, "Oh my gosh, I completely forgot about those. So sorry. Mark will come get them Saturday morning. Thanks for the reminder, Mom." No drama. No argument. Just a simple cause and effect. I looked at the phone, then at the boxes, and smiled. The shift wasn't just in me, it was in how they were learning to respond to the new me. I was teaching them the steps to a new dance, and while they were still a little clumsy, they were starting to learn the rhythm. This wasn't a journey of leaving my family behind. It was a journey of rediscovering myself, so I could finally take my rightful place beside them as an equal, not a servant. My new life, with its pottery classes and garden and quiet mornings, began to settle into a comfortable rhythm. But the most significant changes were happening within my family dynamic. It was a slow, often awkward recalibration. My newfound independence was a stone tossed into the placid lake of their expectations, and the ripples were still spreading. Lucy, in particular, struggled and grew in equal measure. Her initial shock and hurt had given way to a period of careful observation. She would call me, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice before she asked for anything, as if she were testing the waters. "Hey, Mom," she said one Friday afternoon. "I know this is last minute, but Chloe's daycare just called. There's a stomach bug going around and they're closing early. I have a huge deadline at work. Is there any chance?" The old me would have dropped everything. The new me took a beat. I was planning on spending the afternoon reading in my new garden chair. It wasn't an unbreakable commitment, but it was my plan. It was my time. "I can't today, honey," I said, and my own heart gave a pang of the old guilt. "I have plans this afternoon. But I'm free tomorrow morning from 9 until noon if you need to catch up on work then." I was offering a compromise, not a capitulation. I was defining my availability. There was a pause on the line, and I braced myself for a guilt trip. Instead, what I heard was a weary sigh of acceptance. "Okay," she said. "Okay, yeah, that actually helps a lot. I can juggle things for a few hours, and then I can really focus tomorrow morning. Thanks, Mom. I appreciate it." It was a breakthrough. She hadn't pushed. She had accepted my boundary and worked with the solution I offered. She was learning that my no wasn't a rejection of her, but an affirmation of myself. A few weeks later, Lucy called just to chat. There was no request, no hidden agenda. She asked about my pottery class. I told her about the vase I was working on, how I was struggling with the glaze. "That sounds really cool, Mom," she said, and her interest sounded genuine. "You know, I saw a gallery downtown that features local artists. Maybe you could sell some of your stuff there one day." I laughed. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Most of my things still look like they were made during an earthquake. But thank you for saying that." Then her voice got quiet. "You seem happier." The observation hung in the air. "I am," I said simply. "I'm glad," she said, and I could hear the sincerity in her voice. "And I'm sorry for how I was. I see it now. I see that we were treating you like a household appliance. Something that's just always there and you only notice it when it breaks down. It wasn't fair." The apology, offered freely and without prompting, meant more to me than she could ever know. It was an acknowledgement of my humanity, a validation of the difficult changes I had made. It was the healing balm on a wound I'd carried for years. My relationship with David and his family also found a new equilibrium. After our conversation about the car loan, a certain formality had entered our interactions. But it wasn't a cold formality, it was one of respect. He started calling before he came over. He and Sarah hired a high school kid from their neighborhood for their regular date nights. When they went on vacation for a week, they boarded Cooper at a kennel instead of assuming I would take him. One Saturday, they came over for lunch. David walked into my garage to get a ball for James and stopped short. "Whoa, you can actually park a car in here now," he said, looking at the space where Lucy's boxes used to be piled. Then he saw my potting bench, my neat rows of clay pots, and my bags of soil. "And you've been busy." "It's my workshop," I said with a smile. Later, as I was serving dessert, a lemon tart I'd made from a new recipe, Sarah looked at the lopsided, charmingly imperfect bowl I had made, which was now holding fresh strawberries. "Eleanor, did you make this?" she asked, picking it up to examine it. "I did," I said, a little flush of pride warming my cheeks. "It's beautiful," she said. "It has so much character." It was a small moment, but it was significant. They were seeing me. Not just as the woman who made them lunch, but as Eleanor. A woman with hobbies, with talents, with a life that was her own. They were reacting not with resentment, but with a newfound respect and even admiration. The shift was profound. By claiming my own space, I had inadvertently forced them to grow, to become more self-reliant, to see me as a whole person. My independence hadn't pushed them away, it had brought us closer in a healthier, more honest way. Our family was changing, and for the first time, it felt like we were all moving in the right direction. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning, just as I was watering my sunflowers. It was from Lucy, and her voice was strained with a frantic energy that immediately put me on high alert. "Mom, it's Mark. He was in an accident." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My watering can fell from my hand, splashing cold water over my shoes. What happened? Is he okay?" "He was on his way to work, a truck ran a red light. He's at St. Mary's. His leg is broken, a bad fracture they said, and he has a concussion. He is going to need surgery." Her voice broke on the last word. "I'm at the hospital now, Chloe's with my neighbor, but I don't know what I'm going to do." "The surgery is this afternoon, and they said he'll be in the hospital for days, and then he won't be able to put any weight on his leg for weeks. Maybe months." The torrent of panicked words washed over me. I could hear the sheer terror in her voice, the overwhelming weight of the situation crashing down on her. The old me, the fixer, the rescuer, rose up instantly. My mind was already racing. Cancel everything. Pack a bag. Move into her house. Take over the childcare, the cooking, the cleaning. Be the rock. The ingrained instinct to drop my entire life and absorb her crisis was so powerful it was a physical force. But as I stood there, rooted to the spot in my garden, another voice, quieter but steadier, spoke up from the new foundation I had so carefully built. It was the voice of Eleanor. It reminded me that jumping in with both feet, while well-intentioned, would reset our entire dynamic. It would put me right back in the role of the self-sacrificing servant, and it would rob Lucy of the chance to prove to herself that she could handle a crisis. "Okay, sweetheart," I said, my voice much calmer than I felt. "Take a deep breath. Just breathe. You are at the hospital with him now?" "Yes," she sobbed. "That is exactly where you need to be. You stay with Mark. Don't worry about anything else right now. I'm going to make some calls. We will figure this out." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. The urge to simply drive to her house and take over was immense. It would be the easiest thing to do, the path of least resistance. But it wouldn't be the right thing, not for her, and not for me. This was the ultimate test of my new life. Could I support my daughter through a true crisis without losing myself in the process? I went inside and made a cup of strong, sweet tea, forcing myself to sit at the kitchen table for 5 minutes and think. Not just react. Think. What did Lucy truly need? She needed logistical support, not a replacement. She needed to feel empowered, not infantilized. First, I called David and explained the situation. "She's going to need our help, David," I said. "Real help. Not just dropping things on my lap. We need to work as a team." Then, I called Carol. I told her what happened and that I would need to cancel our lunch date. "Of course, dear," she said immediately. "You let me know if you need anything. And I mean anything. A casserole, an ear, someone to watch Chloe for an hour so you can have a cup of tea in peace. Don't you try to do it all yourself, Eleanor. You've learned that lesson." Her words were a lifeline. I wasn't alone in this. My next call was to Lucy's neighbor who had Chloe. I thanked her profusely and told her I was on my way to pick her up. When I got to Lucy's house with Chloe, it was quiet and strangely still. I didn't start cleaning. I didn't start doing laundry. I played with my granddaughter. I made her a simple lunch of macaroni and cheese. I created a pocket of calm in the midst of the storm. Later that afternoon, Lucy called from the hospital, exhausted. Mark was out of surgery and in recovery. "Mom, I don't know how I'm going to manage," she whispered, her voice raw. "I have to work. Mark can't be left alone at first. Chloe needs." "Shh," I interrupted gently. "We're going to make a plan. Together. You, me, David, and Sarah. Tonight, you stay at the hospital. I have Chloe. Tomorrow, David is going to work from home and he can be here with Chloe during the day so you can be with Mark. Sarah will bring dinner over for all of us. We're going to create a schedule, a rotation. We will all share the load." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Really?" "Yes, really," I said firmly. "I will be a huge part of this support system, Lucy. But I will not be the entire system. You have a brother. You have a sister-in-law. You have friends. And most importantly, you have yourself. You are stronger than you think. We will get through this, but we will do it together, as a family of capable adults." In that moment, I understood the true meaning of the change I had fought so hard for. It wasn't about saying no to my family. It was about teaching them, and myself, how to say yes in a way that was sustainable, healthy, and respectful. It was about showing them that my love wasn't measured by my willingness to disappear, but by my ability to stand strong and help them find their own strength. This crisis wasn't the event that would drag me back into my old life. It was the moment that proved, once and for all, that my new life was the one that would truly be able to weather any storm. A deep, profound sense of peace settled over me. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was supposed to do. I wasn't just the mother, I was the anchor. The weeks that followed Mark's accident were a blur of coordinated chaos, a masterclass in the new family dynamic we were forging. The schedule we created became the blueprint for our new normal. I took Chloe 2 full days a week. David worked from home one day and took her for another. Sarah, a saint in my eyes, managed shopping and cooked big batches of food that could be easily reheated. Carol and my other friends from the pottery studio even pitched in, dropping off meals or offering to take Chloe to the park for an hour, giving me a much-needed break. It was a community effort, a web of support with my daughter and her family at the center. I was deeply involved, but I was not consumed. I still went to my pottery class on Tuesday nights. David or Sarah would cover for me. I still had lunch with Carol. I still spent quiet mornings in my garden. My life had expanded to hold the crisis, but it had not been erased by it. This was the crucial difference. One afternoon, about a month after the accident, I was at Lucy's house. Mark was propped up on the sofa, his leg in a massive cast resting on a mountain of pillows, and Chloe was napping upstairs. Lucy was on the floor, sorting through a mountain of medical bills and insurance forms, a look of sheer exhaustion on her face. "I don't know how people do this," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "It's just endless." I sat down in the armchair opposite her. "One day at a time, honey. That's all you can do." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a weary gratitude. "I couldn't do it without you, Mom. Without all of you." She paused, then took a deep breath. "You know, a year ago, I would have just expected you to handle all this. I would have dropped it all in your lap and been resentful if you even sighed. I hate that I was that person." "You were overwhelmed," I said gently. "We were all stuck in a pattern we didn't know how to break." "You broke it," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "You showed us a different way. And you were right. I am stronger than I thought." She managed a small, tired smile. "It turns out I'm actually pretty good at intimidating insurance agents over the phone." I smiled back, my heart swelling with pride. This was the true gift. It wasn't just that I had reclaimed my own life, It was that I had given my daughter the space to discover her own strength. By stepping back, I had allowed her to step up. Our conversation was interrupted by the chime of the doorbell. It was a delivery man with a large, flat box. Lucy looked confused. "I didn't order anything." She signed for it and brought it inside, slicing it open with a kitchen knife. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a beautiful, handcrafted wooden sign. In elegant, carved letters, it said, "Eleanor's Studio." Lucy gasped, holding it up for me to see. There was a small card attached. She read it aloud. "For the artist in residence. We are so proud of you. Love, Lucy, David, Mark, Sarah, Chloe, and James." Tears sprang to my eyes. I was speechless. I took the sign from her, my fingers tracing the smooth, carved letters of my own name. It was the most thoughtful gift I had ever received. It was a testament, carved in wood, that they saw me. They truly, finally saw me. Eleanor. The artist. The creator. The woman with a studio in her garage. "Oh, honey," I whispered, my voice thick. "It's beautiful." "We wanted you to have something for your space," Lucy said, her own eyes glistening. "A real sign. Because what you're doing is real. You're real." We hugged, a long, heartfelt embrace that said more than words ever could. It wasn't the desperate, clinging hug of a child to a parent, but the warm, respectful embrace of two women who had found a new, more honest way to love each other. The old dynamic of demand and sacrifice was gone, replaced by a new one of mutual support and genuine appreciation. I had my family back, not as dependents, but as partners. Later that day, after I went home, I took the sign out to my garage. I cleared a space on the wall above my pottery wheel and carefully hung it. I stepped back and looked at it. Eleanor's Studio. It was more than a sign, it was a declaration. It was a symbol of my journey from invisibility to vibrant, undeniable presence. It was a promise that I would never again allow myself to fade into the background of someone else's life. The peace that settled over me was profound and complete. It was the peace of being known, of being valued, of being home. Years have passed since the day that sign was hung in my garage. It's still there, a little dusty now, a silent witness to the countless hours I've spent at my wheel. My hands, now spotted with age, are stronger and more certain. My shelves are filled with my creations, vases that hold flowers from my garden, bowls that serve salads at family dinners, and whimsical sculptures that make my grandchildren giggle. My life did not become smaller as I grew older, it became infinitely larger, richer, and more colorful. My relationship with my children has blossomed into something I never could have imagined in those old, fraught days. It is a relationship built on the solid bedrock of mutual respect. They call me often, not with a list of demands, but to share a funny story, to ask for my opinion, to simply connect. They see me as a source of wisdom and love, not as a resource to be exploited. We are a family of individuals who choose to support and cherish one another. Lucy and Mark weathered their storm and came out stronger on the other side. Mark made a full recovery, and Lucy discovered a fierce competence in herself that has served her well in all aspects of her life. She is teaching Chloe, now a bright, confident teenager, the same lesson I had to learn so late in life, that your own needs are not a selfish indulgence, but a necessary foundation for a full and happy life. David and I have a quiet, deep understanding. He makes a point of calling me just to check in, and he is the one who now reminds the rest of the family to plan around my schedule. He paid off the car loan years ago, and our relationship, once strained by unspoken financial tensions, is now easy and relaxed. I sit now in my garden, in the same worn chair that once felt like a prison of waiting. The sun is setting, painting the sky in hues of soft pink and brilliant orange. My sunflowers, descendants of that first defiant patch, stand tall against the fence, their faces turned toward the last light of day. The air is peaceful, filled with the gentle hum of evening and the scent of night-blooming jasmine. I am 78 years old, and for the first time in my life, I feel truly, deeply free. My worth is not determined by how much I give, but by who I am. My joy is not a reflection of someone else's happiness, but a wellspring from within my own soul. I learned that setting boundaries is not an act of selfishness, but an act of self-preservation. It is the highest form of love, because you cannot pour from an empty cup. You must first nurture your own garden before you can offer flowers to others. The greatest tyranny is that by choosing myself, by refusing to be the silent, sacrificial servant, I became a better mother and grandmother. I gave my children the gift of their own resilience. I gave my grandchildren the model of a woman who is whole, vibrant, and fiercely her own person. The phone doesn't chime with urgent demands anymore. The quiet of my house is no longer a sign of neglect, but a canvas for my own life. It is a cherished peace, earned through a quiet revolution that began with a simple doctor's appointment and a refusal to be invisible. I look at my gnarled, clay-stained hands, and I see the hands of a creator, the hands of a woman who finally, in the golden autumn of her years, learned how to shape her own life. And it is a beautiful